There's a lot of Magic the Gathering players that do not realize that Commander Masters is not only a Commander product or a Legacy product or a Vintage product, but it's also a Pauper product. And as we see so many eternal playable kind of staples and just really cool niche cards enter the Pauper foray, and we'll get to see how the format changes. Now, the cards I want to talk about today in terms of the downshifts and their impact, they are in no particular order, and I will not be going over every single quote unquote good downshift. These are the ones that I simply want to highlight, I thought had an interesting flair to them, and some of the cards I notably haven't mentioned, I probably just don't have the brewer's mind for, so I'm going to leave it up to the intellectuals out there. If I'm missing a card, I need to hear about it in the comment section down below, because I need to hear why you think and maybe the card combinations that you have make it busted, and why ultimately it should have been in this video. So, and in no particular order, the first downshift that we're going to talk about is Lotleth Giant. Now, the Giant itself, fantastic finisher for any graveyard deck out there. First of all, a great reanimation target, a 6/5 big body. The zombie subtype matters as well, and just being able to fill your graveyard is actually relatively easy. There's a lot of great decks out there, and I think there's a sneaky deck that people aren't aware of. People are thinking about, you know, black reanimator, black green reanimator. No, I'm more so thinking about this sucker right here. If you're looking in the middle of the screen, you realize the enchantment I'm talking about, and that is Tortured Existence, black green Tortex, a deck that exists in the fringes of Pauper play, and one of the really cool decks out there centered around Tortured Existence. Now with effects like Lotleth Troll, or an effect like this, it can have this ultimate finisher that it doesn't need to dirl around for. It can just ram into this and play it down. So, you know, the ability itself, choose and discard a creature card, return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So you're already putting creatures into your graveyard. There's already going to be stuff in there. And with some recent additions we're going to talk about, I think Lotleth Troll is going to have some really easy targets that are already going to be there, and even Tortured Existence struggle to put cards into the graveyard early, but I think especially with Lord of the Rings recently, Troll of Khazad-dûm is a fantastic addition to this, because on turn one you can just swamp cycle it away, get your duel, get your swamp, whatever you need, just so this is already in the graveyard. You can then keep cycling it back with Tortex and just go back and forth, ramp out, ramp in, whatever, and you're filling your graveyard for the Lotleth Troll to come in and finish at some point in the game, but then also give fodder to your Tortured Existence. So I think Lotleth Troll being that ultimate finisher and having more recent supplement cards like Troll of Khazad-dûm is really important. We also have another downshift here as well that's now Pauper League. Mire Triton's really interesting just because with burn all over the format, the gain 2 life is great. The 2/1 blocker with Death Touch is great in terms of chumping, and then the milling 2 is also really relevant. So whether it goes into Tortex or some type of reanimator strategy, this isn't really a highlight of Mire Triton, although this is a downshift. This is more so Lotleth Troll coming together in some type of reanimator, Tortex shell, whatever it might be. I think it's going to be really cool to see this, and those main board graveyard hate pieces, especially the ones that you see in decks like Affinity, are going to be working overtime once these become legal, so I would watch out for them soon. Next up, Cryptic Serpent is a really kind of easy include. It's the one that people have been thinking about the most. So a blue for a 6/5. We've seen this template before, and the reason I say blue, that reduction for each instant sorcery card in your graveyard. There's obviously 2 big cards that I'm thinking about that template similarly, and there are 2 that I want to highlight, and it matters in terms of the body. So keep in mind that this is a blue 6/5. The next card that we can think about in the Dimir control decks alongside Gurmag Angler as a threat would be Tolarian Terror. Now this is blue and 6 for a 5/5, so this is the same mana cost. We go back to it, it's a little bit more intensive, but this is cheaper to cast. It has ward 2, so it has protection, but has 1 less power. The key though is that in this case, a Tolarian Terror can block and beat out a Cryptic Serpent and vice versa because of that 5 toughness. But another common serpent that does exist in the Pauper format, and shows up every so often, it's not that common in Pauper these days, but it happens, is Gear Seeker Serpent. And being blue 5, 1 less for each artifact you control, so definitely not the same type of deck, but you will come across battlefield states where both of these are cross from each other. Gear Seeker Serpent can't be blocked. That's still a large cost to pay 6 mana for. So the 6 toughness was actually really hard for the Dimir control deck outside of of removal. So you would have a Gurmag Angler that can attack in, a Tellurian Terror that can attack in, but now Gearseeker Serpent having 6 power is actually really relevant against board states, against something like this. So regardless, it doesn't have the protection, but I think the 1 power is really relevant in this matchup specifically, because 5 power is already, even 5 power or 5 toughness is already powerful enough as it is, subverting a lot of removal in the format and a lot of combat math in the format. But Gearseeker Serpent, I still think is really relevant, especially as an affinity player myself. So I may have a bias there, but just being able to now trade with it is a great supplement to Gearseeker Serpent. We'll slowly understand if Dimir Control will play Gearseeker Serpents additionally, or replace some of its cards, or we'll just see a mono blue Serpent Control deck or whatever it might be to thing it. But again, I think the stats matter. The lack of protection is important, but I think the 6 power is good. Next up, we have All That Glitters, and I think, so I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I think people are too excited for this. And so I want to highlight why. Obviously, this is going to be going in Bogle's, potentially some type of Artifact Matters deck. Now, Affinity could definitely splash into this. There's a lot of ways to create multicolor mana in that deck through the spheres or the treasure tokens that it makes. So it's not hard, and you can come in with the Giant Beater. The problem is, even in Affinity, you have a lack of evasion, and that's the theme I want to go with here. So outside of Affinity, I want to keep to the Bogles. This is probably going to be the deck that plays it. Now, this is a very similar fact to things that we already have. So let's highlight some of the differences that we have from All That Glitters, namely being that All That Glitters counts artifacts alongside the enchantments. Another effect that we have in Bogles, for one, notably, so we're going to see a bunch of these cards in the deck, is Ethereal Armor. So each enchantment you control, +1/+1, and you get the first strike. Now that's huge. Now it doesn't evade combat, it just wins combat. It just gives you the ability to go over combat. So opponents might think differently when they are blocking with a Death Touch creature, blocking with something that might trade your creature. The first strike is key. Now, another option that you have is Ancestral Mask. Now, this is a 4 of, and I think Ancestral Mask is what you start shaving on, I think, for All That Glitters, just because it's a cheaper effect. Smooths out better into the white. Although white is more of a splash and green is more relevant in this deck, I feel like effects like Rancor, which I'm going to talk about in a second, are going to be more relevant as a splash than Ancestral. So Ancestral Mask being 3 mana is actually very important, because this is a very aggressive deck. You don't want to draw a lot of your lands. You want to thin out your deck. You want to be drawing more of your enchantments. This counts each other enchantment on the battlefield. That's very relevant in a world full of Utopia Sprawls and Ponza. You have a random enchantment or 2 in Affinity as well. There's a lot of great enchantments out there outside of the Bogle's Mirror. So this actually scales with some of your opponent's decks. So that's important too. But it also doesn't provide a form of evasion. So doesn't the previous effect. If we look back, Ethereal Armor, this isn't evasion, doesn't have trample, flying, whatever. So I think because of those reasons, I don't think All That Glitters is going to be an instant crazy take over the format. I think it will be a good card. I think we'll be seeing somewhere in the range of 2 to 4 copies in Bogles, potentially replacing Ancestral Mask. But without the ability to have trample, flying, menace, whatever it might be, you need these effects, because even if you have a 20/20, a 50/50, a 100/100, if it gets chumped by a 1/1 token, it doesn't matter how strong that creature is. So those are the type of effects that you need more of, that you need to be more efficient of, and that's how Wizards is balancing the Bogles deck. So I don't blame them. I'm not saying All That Glitters needs that, but it's not going to be the instant break the format that everyone is thinking about. So I want to temper those expectations with that little analysis there. And with Slippery Bogles itself, you obviously have the protection in the hexproof, but again, you don't have any ability to go over. Even with Silhana you do, because Silhana can only be blocked by creatures with flying. So there is a little bit, but again, with the 1-drops specifically in the deck, you don't have much. So there is a potential that the deck goes up on Silhanas with All That Glitters, because you do want to just get around and circumvent things. That's a good creature to put it on, now that I'm thinking about it. But hey, decks, the Bogles decks have been known to play 1 to 3 copies, so it's not as common as you might think when it comes to that. And again, just highlighting that Rancor is going to be really important, just providing trample, just being a recursive threat. If your Bogles dies, if it gets removed, it's just going to return to your hand, a repeatable problem for your opponent. Rancor and other trample effects in the deck are going to be what's key. Now, this is the big card. This is the card that I think is going to have the biggest impact on Pauper. Now, it's not going to be the main board staple, but it's going to be that piece in sideboards that I think changes the game. Now, being 4 mana instant speed, I get it. 4 mana is huge. But with a lot of the big mana that's out there, a lot of ways that decks have to ramp, I don't think the 4 mana is going to be as intensive, with the format being more board-based burn, just playing to the board a bit more. Obviously, you have better board wipes in terms of cost, but I think 3 is really important. Being 2 to each creature and each player is great too, because it's a form of aggression, but then still having the instant speed effect on your main phase is important too, because maybe you have some effects where you cast a spell and then you cast Sulfurous Blast in response. Maybe you cast another spell, you just cast in a response. The instant speed matters if in those key kind of niche scenarios that you want to get it out on your main phase. Now, let's walk through the numbers a little bit. So instant speed, 2 damage if you cast it anywhere outside of your main phase, but the 3 damage is so it's essentially 4 mana, right? You're casting this on rate because it's 3 mana, right, to do like a 2 damage board wipe if you think about it like that, and then 1 more mana, 1 more red to like a lightning bolt, right? So each player, each creature, you're losing some life as well, so there is some downside. Your creatures are getting hit as well, but ideally you're going to be playing larger creatures where this does not matter. So some of the things that you want to compare this to, Fiery Cannonade is probably the most common. We use this because there aren't many pirate subtypes in the format. There is that, I believe it's like a red Buccaneer that's also a pirate that has I believe it's a 5/2 that provides a monarch, and I believe is a pirate too. So there is that scenario where Fiery Cannonade doesn't hit that, but regardless, this is probably the most common board wipe out there, other than like Trickery, or there is that 1 mana sorcery that deals 1 damage to each creature and each opponent. There's that as well. Crypt Wrapped is probably the next most comparable in the sense that this is a threat, but being 3 or more damage, Crypt Wrapped was really your go-to. Not only was this a win condition because it was each creature and each player, it scaled really well. You dumped a lot of mana into it. So this was the next comparable thing. So 3 damage is the next big breakpoint that Pauper has access to. And now at instant speed, that's the key. You have big effects at sorcery speed, but at instant speed, come on, nothing's comparable. Some of the creatures that you want to think about that this hits, Kenku Artificer, you're going to put 3/1/1 counters on target non-creature artifact. The key here is that Kenku is probably going to put counters on the indestructible artifacts, the lands themselves. It's probably not going to put it on some of the destructible ones. Even if it does put it on the destructible ones, it's probably going to be the ones that draw cards. Regardless, it is relevant if they don't have indestructible artifact lands. Kenku is something that you can kill, so you kill this and the 1/1 counter creature. Next up, you have Core Skyfisher. Just red being able to hit this is huge. Dawnbringer Cleric is another one. Augur of Bolus, like the list goes on. There's actually a surprising amount of 1/3s that before used to actually be good blockers, but now you're able to potentially just deal with. You're going to lose your creatures anyway, but you're just going to be able to deal with them efficiently. They're not going to block your 1/1s, your 1/2s, your 2x's, whatever. You now have the option in red decks, potentially in multicolor decks, which we'll go over, to have that board wiped. The symmetrical effect will keep this limited in the decks that play it, but that is important. Thorn of the Black Rose is a nice little last include in the Orzhov decks, the black decks. Again, being Death Touch as well, getting rid of this is going to be big. The deck that I think is going to play it is primarily going to be Panza, just because it can ramp into it. You do lose your Arbor Elves and your Llanowar Visionaries, but notably, it also kills Boarding Party. So this is a maybe. I think losing Boarding Party is actually really important. It might be a case against it. It might be why you keep Fiery Cannonade. And I don't think the deck really has a problem going over some of those creatures that I was mentioning, like the Augurs, the Skyfishers. It just goes over with a lot of trample effects, but you still keep your Avenging Hunters, your Generous Ents, and your Annoyed Altasaurs. So there is still a lot of great optionality that you get past this. I think it's going to be a really important board wipe in the Panza deck. And then ultimately, just all the modality in it. It still does 2 damage outside. If you meet it within its specific condition of the main phase, it's fine. It's still instant speed. Maybe you play a creature, force a counter spell, then you play Sulfurous Blast, you have a bunch of mana up. This one specifically saying Ponza being the deck, because usually the type of deck that has this much mana up, and that's something that you can take advantage of with this board wipe. Now ultimately, those are the cards that I want to talk about. Let me know in the comment section down below what cards I miss and why I missed them, because there are a bunch of cards that I think are good, like Dread Return. I just don't know how to best take advantage of them. Sure, it's 4 mana to reanimate, but ideally you want to do this in such a way where you can flashback, sack 3 creatures, and bring another back. So is there a deck that can really do that, like flood the board, reanimate, and still want to reanimate on the front side? That's how I'm thinking about it. And maybe I'm a little spoiled from like Legacy Dredge being able to do this with Narcomoebas. So potentially I'm just thinking about this too far, and just being 4 mana reanimate is fine. It's good enough. But I'm hoping someone can let me know of a strategy that can use that. That's why I didn't include it in the list. And any of the other cards I didn't mention, let me know what I'm missing, what deck you're looking forward to, and if the meta is going to shift at all. Enjoy the cards, enjoy the pack openings, and get excited for some Walls of Eldraine right around the corner.